Coming up on Arirang News, South Korea receives another 500,000 doses of the Pfizer vaccine, which have now been distributed to vaccination centers. These doses are for seniors 75 and older who start getting them next month. The number of babies born in South Korea in January fell to a new all-time low. The figure's been falling every month for over 5 years, a trend exacerbated by the pandemic. And the foreign minister of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, is in South Korea for talks with his counterpart in Seoul. It's his first visit to South Korea in 8 years and comes as tensions rise in the Indo-Pacific region. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. South Korea has taken delivery of another 500,000 doses of the Pfizer vaccine and distributed them to vaccination centers across the country. These are for people aged 75 and up who will get them starting next month. Kim Yeon-sung reports.
500,000 doses of Pfizer vaccines arrived at Incheon Airport on Wednesday morning around 7:30 a.m. After arrival, these doses were distributed across 22 vaccination centers nationwide. The National Medical Center in Seoul received 12,000 doses of the Pfizer vaccine. The vials of vaccines will be kept in storage in the ultra-low temperature freezer until next month. From April 1st, these doses will be used to inoculate those aged 75 or over. But with over 3,600,000 people in that age group, Wednesday's batches alone won't be nearly enough. Another 500,000 doses of the Pfizer vaccine will come into the country by next week. And by the end of June, another 6 million doses will be rolling in. On top of this, some 7 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine are scheduled to come in. To date, the government has secured enough vaccines for a total of 79 million people, either through striking a deal directly with the vaccine companies themselves or through the COVAX initiative. The government says it is especially important for seniors or those with underlying health conditions to get the jab. So far, some 700,000 people, or roughly 1.36% of South Korea's population, have received the first dose of COVID-19 vaccines. Kim Yeon-sung, Arirang News.
South Korea's new cases of COVID-19 today were back above 400 after a drop below that mark yesterday. The country is about to hold its second major election in the pandemic, this one to choose new mayors in Seoul and Busan. Case numbers are far higher this time, though, than they were a year ago. So the prime minister is urging everyone to be careful. Ji-young has more.
South Korea's number of new virus cases has bounced back to surpass the 400 mark. The country reported 428 new infections, up 82 from the previous day, bringing the total caseload to 99,846. Among newly added cases, 411 were locally transmitted, and nearly 75% of those were from the capital Seoul and the surrounding areas. Over the last 7 days, the number of daily cases has topped the 400 mark 6 times. Considering the rise in cluster infections across the country, health authorities will decide whether to adjust social distancing level on Friday. 2 weeks ahead of by-elections slated for April 7th, Prime Minister Chung Se-kyun said it is important to go all out to prevent the spread of the virus.
The full-fledged election campaigning begins tomorrow. Last April, we successfully held a general election where the whole nation participated. Although this year's by-election is smaller in size, we should remain on guard against potential outbreaks. Back then, the daily new infections ranged in the 20s, but now the country is reporting 300 to 400 cases per day.
During a daily interagency meeting on the COVID-19 response on Wednesday, the Ministry of the Interior and Safety introduced election-focused measures to allow safe proceedings. Polling stations will be installed inside COVID-19 treatment centers so that those who are being treated for COVID-19 can vote. Those under self-quarantine but with no symptoms and are confirmed negative will be able to vote at polling stations at a separate time slot. And local governments will also support disinfection work at the polling stations and ballot count locations. Ji-young, Arirang News.
The U.S. government's top expert on infectious diseases, Dr. Fauci, says the vaccine from AstraZeneca is most likely a very good vaccine, but he's concerned about how the company is presenting its data. Speaking Tuesday to Good Morning America on ABC News, Dr. Fauci said that while the data are positive, what was provided to the media was not totally accurate. The U.S. Safety Monitoring Board, he said, is concerned that the data are old and might be misleading. He was referring to AstraZeneca's announcement on Monday that its vaccine had an efficacy rate of 79% and prevented severe disease and hospitalization at a rate of 100%. The number of babies born in South Korea fell to a new all-time low in January. In fact, the number has been on an on-year decline now for 62 months in a row. And the number of new marriages last year fell by the most since the mid-1990s. Paeunji has the details.
The number of births in South Korea in January dropped for the 62nd month in a row. According to data by Statistics Korea on Wednesday, the number of births dropped 6.3% on year to around 25,000. This means the number of deaths outnumbered births by more than 2,000, a larger gap compared to the same month last year when deaths surpassed births by about 1,700. Statistics Korea says the drop in the number of births is mainly due to fewer women of childbearing age.
The number of women in their 30s has been declining, and the number of newlyweds has also been falling for 9 straight years since 2012.
She added that couples delaying their weddings because of the pandemic impacted the figures as well. There were 16,280 marriages in January, down nearly 18% on year. That's the largest on-year fall for the month of January in more than 20 years, since a decline of 22.9% was recorded in January 1997. The number of divorces in January was down by 5.2% on year, to just around 8,400. Paeunji, Arirang News.
South Korea's economy is expected to recover from the pandemic at a faster pace than previously forecast. Bank of Korea Governor Lee Ju-yeol said today that as the U.S. recovery picks up with the recent $1.9 trillion stimulus package, the local economy is forecast to grow faster too. But Lee said that the BOK has no plans for an early end to its own monetary easing policy. Consumer prices rose 1.1% in February on year, which is a higher rate than in recent months, but that's still below the BOK's target of 2%. It seems people have been spending more money to take care of their pets in the pandemic. That's in terms of grooming, medical care, and even dog training. So the industry's actually gotten a boost in the past year, and so have animal-related jobs. Min Soo-hyun has more.
Jobs related to veterinary services have been left somewhat untouched by the COVID-19 pandemic. According to a local job portal site, from February 2020 to January 2021, there were almost 2,000 job openings in this sector compared to just 8 from a year earlier. A manager at a vet store in Seoul says this is due to growing demand for veterinary care.
Because we have more dogs to take care of and we're opening new branches, our staff has increased by more than 500% compared to 2019.
Recruitment has been high for veterinary technicians, pet groomers, professional dog trainers, and staff at veterinary clinics. The pet industry is in fact one of the few sectors that's doing well despite the pandemic, and some say this is because of the pandemic.
People are spending more time with their pets at home, fueling demand for veterinary care such as pet grooming, healthcare, and activities.
According to a recent report by KB Financial Group, South Koreans are spending more on their pets. They're currently spending an average of $124 every month, an increase of about $18 from 2018. While the bulk of that money is spent on food and treats, spending on pet grooming and services related to pet hygiene accounted for the next biggest portion as more people feel the need to take good care of their pets. Min Soo-hyun, Arirang News.
Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon. And for that, I'm joined on the line by Professor Ernst Lee from the Hanyang University School of Business. Professor Lee, good to have you back on today.
Hello, David. Thank you very much for having me again.
Well, the Biden administration, as we just heard, is working on a bill or bills of around $3 trillion in spending on the economy. Of course, it's just a few weeks ago Congress spent almost $2 trillion. On the one hand, this could indeed help revive the economy, but there are also concerns about it boosting inflation and other things. So tell us about this new proposal, some background, and what do you make of it?
I think that's very important. The background of why he has come up with such a big fiscal stimulus package. First of all, the $1.9 trillion economic aid package that Mr. Biden signed into law this month includes money to help vulnerable people and businesses survive in the pandemic downturn. But it has nothing to do with the long-term economic agenda that he has set during the presidential campaign, such as transitioning to renewable energy and improving America's ability to compete in emerging industries like electric vehicle and building out the nation's infrastructure and shipping to a low-carbon future. In a way, in summary, it addresses the climate change and improve American manufacturing and high-technology industries in an escalating battle with China, in particular with China, such as in the 5G infrastructure. 5G infrastructure is not only just a valuable infrastructure for communication, but also it has a greater impact to overall future industries, such as electric vehicle. The more sophisticated the electric vehicle and driverless cars may become possible, but it needs a lot of the wider band, 5G, and AI and VR. So 5G is not only just for mobile communication, but it's a new platform and backbone, a new highway for future growth. So it is critical for Biden government to build the infrastructure, which is dominantly occupied by Chinese company Huawei at this moment. So I think this is the main reason. And also, low carbon future. That's has become more and more important as more companies are concerning about ESG, environment, social, and governance. So any product produced by any company, they are benchmarking with the ESG, complying or not. So for that, low carbon, infrastructure is critical for the growth of U.S. industry, I think. That's the background. Yeah.
So it sounds like this bill contains more of the Biden administration's actual agenda, and perhaps including sustainability, and also could present some new business opportunities for those paying careful attention to it. Now, Professor, right now it's tough times for the Korean economy too, and we're seeing a sharp rise in prices for some things, perhaps to continue in the months to come. A lot of debt taken on too during the pandemic. So if we look at the Fed, and if it were to raise rates, that would certainly dent confidence in the financial markets and delay the economic recovery here. So what's being done on that front? What can be done to deal with this possibility?
Well, I think it all depends on the United States, how U.S. will move on to interest rates, because, the recent move, the almost $3 trillion support, it clearly shows uncertainty still prevails in the U.S. economy, and U.S. economy is still, in a way, I think it sounds like a paradox, but still vulnerable. So it needs more support and more sustainable fiscal stimulus package based on low interest rates. So I think this is short-term good for stock market and for a consumer market, but in the long term, that will call for the needs of interest rate rise, and based on the fact that U.S. Treasury bond interest rate is on steady rise. I think I mentioned before last week, but if we compare, the U.S. Treasury bond interest rate was 0.4% 1 year ago. Now it's 1.6%. But the reason why it's important because the commercial companies are issuing bonds and the commercial banks are issuing bonds, but it is benchmarked. So based on U.S. Treasury bond, they add their margins. And then even before Fed interest rate rise, the market interest rate will rise. And that will have a greater impact to Korea, I think. Yes, in responding to your question, I think if U.S. is U.S. dollar, U.S. interest rate rise, that means the value of U.S. dollar is a much stronger. U.S. dollar, USD will be appreciated. And Korean won, in other way, depreciation, meaning that the value of the Korean won depreciates, or maybe I can express this way. Dollar won exchange rate will, spike, going up, hike. And in the positive aspect, of course, it's good for export. But in the negative aspect, I think, emerging market, including Korea, emerging market capitals, the global investors, they have invested in emerging market, they can take out of their capital out of this emerging market. So outflow of foreign capital from Korean market will be very significantly important. When they do that, they have to sell Korean stock and then convert it into U.S. dollar and investment in the mainland of the United States. So our neighbor, China, Chinese renminbi and Japanese yen will be also in a similar position. If U.S. Treasury bond rates rise, and then there's a very near prospect, U.S. interest rate will, not in the immediate, but in the medium and long term, will rise. And
Indeed.
If that may happen, yes.
According to the Fed itself, no sooner than 2023, but as you referenced, the market sets its own interest rates as well. So, the whole world is watching the situation. And Professor, we thank you for sharing your insights with us today.
Right. So that may happen, and then that will have negative impact on Korea. And in particular, Korea has a very high rate of household debt, which amount to 1,700 trillion.
Yeah, that could be a concern.
If interest rate rise, that will have a very negative impact, and then that will have a negative impact to GDP as well.
Indeed. All right, Professor, thank you again for joining us today. We always appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
The Foreign Minister of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, is in Seoul for talks with his South Korean counterpart tomorrow. Russia has been strengthening its ties with China in opposition to U.S. moves in the Indo-Pacific region. It's those issues he'll likely want to discuss, South Korea last week having hosted Lavrov's counterpart from Washington. Yoon Jung-min reports.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's first visit to Seoul in 8 years comes amid what seems to be cooperation between Moscow and Beijing against the U.S. and its allies. During a virtual meeting with Korean correspondents in Moscow last week, Lavrov was vocal about the U.S. so-called Indo-Pacific strategy, as well as the Quad coalition of the U.S., India, Australia, and Japan, which Moscow apparently doesn't want Seoul to join. He claimed that the move is based on building a bloc against specific countries. Lavrov also called South Korea a crucial, promising partner in the Asia-Pacific region. It's very likely that he will bring up these issues when he sits down with South Korea's Foreign Minister Chung Eui-yong on Thursday. They are also likely to discuss Korean Peninsula affairs and a possible visit to Seoul by Russian President Vladimir Putin. The Russian Foreign Minister's trip follows a visit to Seoul by the U.S. Secretaries of State and Defense last week. During the Seoul-Washington talks, one of the areas they agreed to work together on was South Korea's new southern policy regarding the Indo-Pacific region, though there hasn't been a direct call from Washington asking Seoul to join the Quad. Before coming to Seoul, Lavrov was in China for talks with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi. The two diplomats said the U.S. should stop interfering in other countries' internal affairs and forming cliques to confront other countries. This followed a confrontational meeting between U.S. and Chinese officials in Alaska last week, while North Korea and China have shown a desire to strengthen their ties. The Biden administration, on its part, is emphasizing trilateral cooperation between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo on regional and global issues, including on North Korea and China. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
The South Korean military has confirmed reports that North Korea test-fired 2 short-range missiles last weekend. But because they were cruise missiles and not ballistic, they're not seen as a violation of UN Security Council resolutions. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff confirmed Wednesday that North Korea test-fired 2 short-range cruise missiles toward the West Sea last weekend, but the missiles were not ballistic, which would have been a violation of UN Security Council resolutions. According to South Korean military officials, North Korea is currently holding its wintertime drills, which are believed to have begun in December and usually run through the end of March. The last time North Korea test-fired multiple short-range cruise missiles was last April, that time toward the East Sea. The South Korean military's statement comes after the Washington Post and Reuters cited U.S. officials as confirming the launches and speculated the move was a way to pressure the Biden administration as it reviews its North Korea policy. But it's also been reported that U.S. President Joe Biden was quoted as saying the launches had little to no impact on the U.S. policy toward Pyongyang. The timing of the recent test fire comes right after South Korea and the U.S. completed its annual springtime drills held in the Korean peninsula. Kim Yo-jong, the North Korean leader's powerful sister, slammed the drills and sent a mild warning to Washington as top officials visited Seoul for bilateral talks last week. Also, North Korea's first Vice Foreign Minister Choi Sun-hee confirmed the regime will continue to ignore any contact from the U.S., even from a third country, unless Washington withdraws its hostile policies toward Pyongyang. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
And the United States is going to host a meeting of top security advisors from South Korea and Japan next week to discuss its new North Korea policy. Citing senior Biden administration officials, Reuters reports that Washington is in the final stages of its North Korea policy review. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan will discuss the outcomes of the review with his counterparts from Seoul and Tokyo. The Biden administration has been mapping out a comprehensive policy, which it says will lead to a new approach. The UN Human Rights Council has adopted a resolution strongly denouncing North Korea's human rights violations. South Korea was not a co-sponsor this time, but it did support the resolution. Kim Hyo-sun has more.
The UN Human Rights Council has adopted by consensus a resolution condemning human rights abuses in North Korea. It's the 19th consecutive year for the Council to adopt such a resolution since 2003. This year's resolution was submitted by the EU and co-sponsored by 43 countries, including the U.S., which returned after leaving the Council in 2018 during the Trump administration. Seoul did not co-sponsor the resolution. It's the third straight year that South Korea has not joined as a co-sponsor. South Korea's foreign ministry said there is no change in its stance, adding the decision was based on a comprehensive review of various situations. However, it added that it took part in adopting the resolution by consensus, joining international efforts to promote human rights in the North. The resolution condemns the regime for its systematic, broad, and grave violations of human rights, while stressing the importance of providing supplies to the North's most vulnerable people amid the pandemic. It also underscored the urgency of resolving the divided families and reunion issues. It also covers human rights breaches on non-repatriated prisoners of war as well as their descendants. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
In other news, police in the U.S. state of Colorado have identified their suspect in this week's shooting at a supermarket in Boulder, where at least 10 people were killed. President Biden and others are calling on Congress to pass new gun control laws to expand background checks and ban assault weapons. Lee Seung-jae reports.
The suspect, who opened fire inside a crowded Colorado supermarket on Monday, has been identified as 21-year-old Ahmad Al Aliwi Alissa.
This suspect has been identified as Ahmad Alissa, 21 of Arvada. He has been charged with 10 counts of murder in the first degree and will be shortly transported to the Boulder County Jail.
The rampage killed 10 people, including a police officer. The suspect suffered a leg wound during an exchange of gunfire with responding police officers and is in hospital and will be booked in county jail on murder charges. According to court documents, the suspect purchased an assault rifle less than a week before the attack. A law enforcement official who spoke to the AP on the condition of anonymity said the gunman used an AR-15 rifle, a lightweight semi-automatic rifle. Sharing his condolences on Tuesday, President Biden also called on Congress to tighten gun laws, including federal laws to expand background checks and a ban on assault-style weapons.
I don't need to wait another minute, let alone an hour, to take common sense steps that will save the lives in the future and to urge my colleagues in the House and Senate to act. We can ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines in this country once again.
The attack in Boulder, Colorado stunned a state that has already seen several mass shootings in the past, including the 1999 Columbine High School massacre and the 2012 Aurora movie theater shooting. Monday's attack was also the 7th mass killing in 2021, following the March 16th shooting in Atlanta that left 8 people dead, including 6 women of Asian descent. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
And that does it for this newscast. Thank you for watching.